Norway went electric faster than any country on Earth. Its old gasoline cars just changed address. This is Unintended Consequences, episode 97. In a warehouse lot outside Drammen, a 2014 Volkswagen Passat sits with its Norwegian plates already unscrewed. The winter tires are still in the trunk. The service book is complete. Within a month, that same car will be on a lot in Vilnius or Poznań, advertised as a one-owner Nordic import, well-maintained, rust-free, ready for another decade of commuting. The policy that put it there was built to take gasoline cars off Norwegian roads. It moved them onto someone else's. Norway did not stumble into electric cars. It built the world's most generous demand-side electric vehicle regime on purpose, over 3 decades, for reasons that were internally consistent. Electricity in Norway is almost entirely hydropower. By the 1990s, the grid was already among the cleanest on Earth. What was not clean was the tailpipe. Transport was one of the largest remaining sources of domestic greenhouse gas emissions, and a country that sold North Sea oil to the world had both the money and the political need to decarbonize what happened on its own roads. The Storting began stacking privileges in 1990 with an exemption from registration tax. Free municipal parking and a cut in the annual tax followed in 1996. Toll roads opened without charge in 1997. The decisive blow came in 2001. Electric cars were exempted from the 25% value-added tax that every other new vehicle paid. Later came bus lane access, reduced ferry fares, and company car tax advantages. None of this was a lark. Norway already taxed internal combustion cars heavily, by weight, by carbon dioxide, by nitrogen oxides. So the same fiscal machinery that made a gasoline sport utility vehicle expensive could make an electric one look cheap. Across Labour and Conservative governments, the coalition held, because the policy served several audiences at once. Climate targets, a visible answer to the charge that an oil state was a climate hypocrite, and a high-income public that liked new cars. In 2017, the Storting wrote the ambition into the National Transport Plan. All new passenger cars and light vans should be zero emission by 2025. Given the information on the table, a clean grid, a tax system already built for steering, and a sovereign wealth cushion, the design was rational. Those stacked exemptions did not stay on paper. They compounded at the dealership. The incentives were not a single program so much as a pile of exemptions that stacked on top of one another. On a mid-range electric car, the value-added tax holiday alone was worth tens of thousands of kroner. Add the waived purchase tax, and the electric vehicle often undercut a comparable gasoline model after tax. Charging networks thickened along the E6 and in the cities. The Norwegian EV Association, Elbilforeningen, became one of the most effective consumer lobbies in the country, translating each new registration record into an argument for keeping the perks. Early numbers look like a case study in policy that works. Electric cars and plug-in hybrids were a curiosity in the 2000s. By 2019, they were more than 40% of new passenger car sales. In 2020, the share crossed half. In 2022, it approached 4 in 5. By 2023 and 2024, depending on the month, 9 of 10 new cars leaving Norwegian dealerships had a plug. Oslo's air monitors recorded fewer nitrogen oxide spikes. National inventory reports showed transport emissions bending down. Proponents, including ministers under Erna Solberg and later Jonas Gahr Støre, could point to a real domestic result. The new car fleet had been transformed faster than in any other large market. Skeptics existed, but they mostly argued about cost. The tax expenditure per car, the crowding of bus lanes, the fairness of subsidizing Teslas for affluent households in Bærum. What the skeptics did not organize around, at least not at first, was the secondary market. Almost no one in the original design debate treated the used gasoline car as a policy object. The car that left the Norwegian fleet was assumed, implicitly, to have left the problem. A new car miracle is also a used car flood. Norwegian households did not add an electric vehicle on top of the old Volvo. They replaced it. Domestic demand for used gasoline and diesel cars softened just as supply jumped, because the same incentives that made a new ID4 or Model Y irresistible made a 7-year-old Passat harder to sell at home. Exporters stepped into the gap. Norway already had the apparatus of a rich country used vehicle trade, strict periodic inspections, complete service histories, a climate that is hard on salt but easy on rust compared with wetter, poorer markets. Eastern Europe already had the demand. Lithuania, in particular, had become a continental clearinghouse for used cars. Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, and the Baltic states were ready buyers. Tens of thousands of used passenger cars left Norway in the peak years of the transition, a rising share of them the gasoline and diesel vehicles that the electric boom had orphaned. Those cars did not go to scrapyards. They went onto ferries and into sealed trucks, and they went back into traffic. The mechanism is what researchers later described as accelerated vintage transfer across regulatory borders. Every country retires cars. Wealthy countries normally export a large fraction of what they deregister rather than crush it. Norway's incentives did not invent that trade. They sped it up and skewed its contents. People replaced usable internal combustion cars earlier than they otherwise would have, which meant the vehicles crossing the border were not end-of-life wrecks. They were mid-life cars with years of service left, and they were, on average, dirtier than the fleet they were leaving. Fleet data showed that the exported vehicles carried higher average tailpipe emissions than the Norwegian passenger car average before the policy had done its work. That is the opposite of a clean retirement. It is a spatial reshuffle of the high-emitting tail of the fleet. Second-order effects followed the cars. In the destination countries, a well-kept Norwegian diesel is not a curiosity. It is a bargain with a reputation. A Norwegian diesel competes with new cars, including the first cheap electrics, and it competes with whatever older local vehicle it displaces. If that diesel replaces a still dirtier 2000s car, local air quality can improve. If it simply adds cheap mobility, or if it postpones the moment when a Polish or Lithuanian household would have faced a new car market already tilting electric, it extends the life of internal combustion under another flag. Either way, the kilometers do not vanish. They migrate. Some of the same vehicles are re-exported again, from Vilnius toward the Caucasus, Central Asia, or West Africa. A third-order hop that lengthens the chain and moves the emissions into places with weaker inspection regimes and longer remaining vehicle life. Embodied carbon in the steel and aluminum stays in service, which is not nothing, but the tailpipe carbon that Norway no longer counts keeps accumulating somewhere the Norwegian inventory does not see. Accounting made the irony durable. Under the territorial rules of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a ton of carbon dioxide emitted on a ring road outside Krakow does not appear in Oslo's ledger. Norway could report a cleaner national fleet, a collapsing new sales emissions average, and visible progress toward the 2025 zero-emission target, all of which were true inside the border. The net European reduction was smaller than those domestic figures suggested, because the policy had not destroyed a stock of gasoline cars. It had changed their address and, by pulling replacement forward, had quite possibly increased the number of years those particular engines would run. The cars that left were worse than the cars that stayed. The success metric never asked where they went. There is a human texture to this that is easy to miss if the story is told only as a chart. A family in Bergen trades a diesel station wagon for a used Tesla and feels, correctly, that they have done the thing the state asked. A dealer in Kaunas puts Norske Biler on the windscreen because Norwegian origin is a quality signal. One owner, full books, inspection passed. A nurse in Łódź buys that car because a safe, heated, affordable car is not an abstraction. Nobody in that chain is cheating. The incentive did exactly what incentives do. It reallocated objects toward the people who now valued them most. The object in question happened to be a source of carbon dioxide, and the valuation happened to flip at a national border. Norway did not reverse the electric vehicle project, and it should not be pretended that the project failed on its own terms. New car electrification is close to complete. What changed is the generosity at the margin and, more slowly, the conversation about system boundaries. From 2023, value-added tax was applied to the portion of an electric vehicle's price above 500,000 kroner. Weight-based taxes began to claw back some of the advantage of the heaviest electric sport utility vehicles. Bus lane privileges and toll discounts had already been tightened in Oslo and other cities after congestion and political backlash. These were fiscal and urban corrections, not a reckoning with exports. The used internal combustion outflow continues because the underlying arithmetic continues. Norwegian households still prefer to sell than to scrap, and Eastern European households still prefer a cheap, solid combustion car to a new electric they cannot finance. When the leakage became harder to ignore, in research institutes, in the European used vehicle literature, in the fine print of fleet statistics, the obvious fix presented itself. Pair the purchase subsidy with a scrappage requirement, so the old car dies instead of emigrating. That fix carries its own unintended consequence. Crushing a working 2015 Passat wastes the carbon already spent to manufacture it, and it does not guarantee a cleaner outcome downstream. The household in Vilnius will still need a car. If the Norwegian one is gone, the next cheapest import may be older or dirtier, or drawn from another Western European market that is running the same play. Germany's used car exports into Poland and beyond are a parallel river. Mandatory scrappage can satisfy a territorial inventory and still fail a European one, while adding a pile of shredded metal that had years of use left. The European Union has edged toward tighter roadworthiness and end-of-life vehicle rules for exports, and researchers have begun to treat used vehicle trade as a first-class climate variable rather than a footnote. Norway, for now, remains the showcase. The showcase still does not count the cars that left. 3 principles travel beyond Oslo. First, the perimeter of measurement is a policy choice, not a natural fact. If you score a program inside a border, you will harvest transfers and call them reductions. Incentive structures will find the edge of the scoreboard. Second, accelerating turnover is not the same as retiring a technology. The fate of the displaced stock, scrap, export, second life, third life, is where a large share of the physical consequence actually happens, and secondary markets are not a rounding error. Third, the repair can be as leaky as the original design. Scrappage satisfies the inventory and can waste embodied carbon. Doing nothing satisfies the used car buyer and can lengthen the tailpipe's life. Neither is free. The forward question is already live. As Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States push electric vehicle adoption up the same steep curve Norway has already climbed, their gasoline and diesel fleets will have to go somewhere. Some will go to Mexico, some to Eastern Europe, some to West Africa. The mechanism does not require fjords or hydropower. It requires a subsidy on one side of a border and a functioning resale market on the other. The only open issue is whether the next country to declare victory will bother to follow the cars. And that's where today's story leaves us. If it changed how you see one everyday decision, that's the whole point. Pass it along to someone who'd appreciate it, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at Nera Network. Links in the show notes. Quick tip from the network. Try the Do Positive pod next. Good news in science and tech, plus one concrete action you can take. Every Nera Network show is free at neranetwork.com. Following the long arcs, story trackers on neranetwork.com follow major programs across episodes. Tesla, SpaceX, AI, space science, and more. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.